have that is a strategy to have peer support in school. So young people supporting other young people. We know that when young people are in duress, they go to other young people for support, yet our young people are not trained and able to support them. So it's school-wide preparation and teen mental health first aid. But the really critical point about this is that it also comes with a paid internship. So in our state, we have a lot of behavioral health deserts in our state, and this program is seen an early entry into the behavioral health careers and getting young people on a career track to solve some of the the behavioral health deserts that we have in many of our rural communities. Then, as Derek mentioned, we are deeply committed to the Capstone Project work. And this year, we were able to fund paid internships that were community-based capstones. So we paid young people to go out into their community and do capstone projects through an appropriation that we received. And for young people to be able to go out and work in their communities, earn money, and earn credits to be able to get on track to graduate. And this project was specifically dedicated to young people that are behind in school or off track, because we felt like we needed to give them a shot of meaning and purpose, care for their well-being, and a lot of mentorship to get them over the graduation hump. And then finally, this is within a framework of new graduation requirements that have both capstones and internships as graduation pathways now, where young people can graduate with those pathways. And that's all oriented toward a graduate profile, which is what do communities want from their young people when they graduate. So I hope I did you all okay in that 15 minutes, and I will stay on if there's any questions. Thank you.
Lots of applause here, Tony. That was perfect. Thank you for sticking to time and such a succinct summary of such a complex amount of work. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people here interested in the capstone projects, as I was. You're actually slightly inside, so I'm going to, whether there's a question from the floor that we could ask Tony right now, or whether nothing burning. Well, then I will move on. Oh, sorry, Rose. So what I've just been asked, Tony, was whether there was an example of the capstone project. I was planning on sharing some of the video material that explained the entire story with people afterwards, but maybe you've got one that you could succinctly give us an example of.
Yeah, so we actually, I'll tell you all a little story about our experience during COVID. So during COVID, we had dramatic attendance issues during COVID. We had so many young people checked out of school. And we were very fearful about what was going to happen with those young people that were untethered to school. And so we built group internships, which were actually capstone projects. And those capstone projects those group internships have now oriented themselves backward from social issues in their own community. So we have young people now that are doing internships in homelessness, and they're group internships, and they're all placed in homeless serving organizations. And the group internship has now a social and emotional support component. So young people are working together on a project. They're checking for their own well-being. And they graduate now with an interdisciplinary project that's rooted in what a community need is that they've identified. Most of those young people are also homeless. So it's been a really powerful example of how we can engage young people in the future of their own communities, the well-being of their own communities.
Thanks, Tony. The thing for me about the capstone, and I will share the video because it tells the story, is that when you're talking about internship, what appealed to me, they're doing all the language learning. There's a lot of communication skills development. There's a lot of social skills developed. There's a lot of critical thinking development, and it's all being taken into account as part of that capstone assessment. but deeply, deeply engaging and meaningful to the students. So Tony, thank you for that. Great, you're going to stay on and we'll come back. We're going to go now to Jeff, because Jeff his organisation has worked, as I said, in many states across the US. That's the book that has become one that I read regularly on the plane now, chapter just with stories after story after story. Jeff, so great that you can join us, and look forward to hearing what you have to share with us as well.
Thank you, Derek. Kia ora. It is wonderful to be with all of you. I have to say, I actually, just a few months ago, was in New Mexico and had the chance to visit with some of the young learners that Tony's organization has worked with, and listen to them talk about their internships and listen to them talk about their capstones. And everything he said was just profoundly inspiring to see how motivated these students were to really do something that felt relevant, that felt like they were making a difference, that felt like school was for a purpose that mattered to them. So I'm just grateful to Tony for the work, and we're privileged to have had a chance to hear from him. Let me just take a moment and share my screen. Hopefully this will work easily. Can you all see my screen okay? Okay, great. So I am the co-founder of an organization called Transcend. We look at ourselves as an R&D engine, research and development engine for innovation in school design. And our vision is that all young people learn in ways that enable them to thrive in and transform the world. And for us, thriving in and transforming the world is the purpose of education for all young children. And to do that, they need an extraordinary education. And when we think about an extraordinary education, it's a few different things that line up. One is an extraordinary education is aligned to how young people learn best. It's also aligned to what students and families want. And we heard Tony talk a lot about listening to what people want. And it's also aligned to what the future demands. Where are jobs going? Where are demographics going? And so on. And so we think about it, extraordinary education as lining up those three things. And they do that by providing experiences that are deeply engaging and deeply effective at building the knowledge and skills and mindsets that young people need to thrive. We think about engaging experiences and effective learning, and we'll come back to that. And while we have seen a whole number of promising innovations that have resulted in all kinds of new research-based models and practices, and our organization has been fortunate to get a chance to work with some leading visionaries who've done that, the vast majority of students, at least in the United States, and I believe around the world too, are still learning in an outdated model of school. One that emerges from an industrial design. And so we think about how do we, the name of our organization is Transcend. How do we transcend that? How do we make leaps towards extraordinary learning for all? And in our organization, we think a lot about leaps in terms of the kinds of experiences that young people have, shifting from experiences that feel pretty irrelevant to experiences that feel deeply relevant, shifting from experiences that feel like students are basically passive consumers at best of education to experiences where students feel like they're actively driving their own education, experiences where they feel on the margins to experiences where they feel deeply part of a community with their identity and their history affirmed, and so on. And for us, the question is, how do we get to that? How do we make those shifts? And at least in our country, we have seen several different versions of change not add up. One version is top down, where there's essentially a bunch of research done and people come up with a solution and they impose it on communities. And we see that often doesn't come up with the right answers or the best models. And certainly they don't stick. People are not invested in them. We've also seen efforts at fully bottoms-up solutions, which are placing extraordinary burden on already overburdened educators and families and students. And often people don't have the resources to really drive that or sustain that. And so we're trying to work on what we look at as a third way that combines the best of top-down, which does have some advantages in terms of concentrating expertise and resources and so on, with the best of grassroots, which empowers young people who are the experts in their own experiences and their families and their educators to forge a vision. And so this third way of change we call community-based design. And we look at this as a community-based design journey, which is an ongoing process. It's iterative, where young people and families and educators and administrators and experts and community leaders are coming together to change the way we do school, are coming together to ask questions like, what do we want of our graduates? Ask the kinds of questions that Tony was talking about earlier. Ask the kinds of questions like, what kinds of experiences do we want to have? What kinds of models are we inspired by that we might want to borrow from? What kinds of trends do we see going on in our community and in the country and in the world that we need to be responsive to? And learn about all that together and begin to envision something different, begin to either build it or borrow it and build it in, test it in small scale ways, and continually do this process. We call this the community-based design process. And because we don't think that design journeys are ever done, because the world is never done changing, we're looking to build this muscle to help communities build the capacity to do this. And so this is broadly speaking how we think about what community-based design is and does. And it starts by really tending to two things. At the technical level, it's tending to the design of any learning environment. So it's asking questions like, what are the learning objectives? And what are the learning design principles? And what does that mean for how we use time? And what does that mean for how we use space and budget and content and assessment and pedagogy and educator roles and community partnerships and so on? And all of that gets captured and codified in what we call the blueprint of a school design. But equally important are the community conditions, and this is the human side of it. This is asking questions like, are we actually clear about what we want? And how much conviction do we really have about it? And how strong is our coalition? And do we really have a culture of learning and trust and innovation? And are we building the capacity to actually continue to do this design and to actually pull it off? And when at its best, a community-based design process is simultaneously generating a better design of the learning environment, but also richer and deeper community conditions. And every community has a certain profile of conditions, and we measure these conditions using tools and rubrics and assessments, not in ways that are judgmental or evaluative, but in ways that are side by side with communities to help them see what are the strengths of their conditions. And we believe that any community can go on a design journey no matter where its starting conditions are, but the journey itself just simply needs to be tailored to the conditions. And we see some communities have strong conditions and they can move very quickly, and other communities need to invest more in their conditions. And design journeys can go as fast as the pace of conditions allows. They can go at the speed of conditions. And when this happens over time, better designs start to emerge. And with better implementation through the capacity that is built in educators and young people and families, that is what starts to give rise to extraordinary learning. Not just learning outcomes, but learning experiences. And as I mentioned earlier, we hold experiences, engaging experiences, as equally important to the outcomes, both because experiences are what drive outcomes, but also because we believe that experiences are an end in of themselves, the kinds of experiences that young people have in school. And in our country, the predominant focus of education reform has historically been on outcomes, a very narrow set of measurable outcomes. And we are trying to expand the dialogue to say, let's broaden the kinds of outcomes that we measure and let's hold experiences side by side and let's measure experiences with the same level of seriousness and rigor that we measure outcomes. And so we also measure experiences through the voices of young people, through psychometrically validated student voice surveys. And we look at those and we see correlations to outcomes, but the school communities that we work with also look at experiences before, during, and after design processes to see, are we moving relevance? Are we moving a sense of agency? Are we moving a sense of community? Are we moving a sense of high expectations and so on? So this is roughly the process. And as we think about this in any context, whether a US state or the country overall, what we think is needed in the ecosystem are three big things. One is we think we need more models and design supports. And when I say models, I mean codified examples of innovative designs so that communities don't have to start from scratch. That doesn't mean just imposing models on communities, but it means giving communities a starting point that they can borrow from and all kinds of other design supports to know how to run a community-based design process locally. We're also investing in more evidence and insights so that more and more people can say, undeniably, if you go through a process like this and if you make these shifts in experiences, better opportunities come about for young people. And then we need a conducive ecosystem. As Tony was just talking about, we need policies that are conducive to this. We need state leaders and national leaders who are talking about this. We need a knowledge base. We need leadership. We need a different public discourse around what education means. And so at Transcend, we're trying to invest in these three areas so that more and more communities can go on these kinds of design journeys. And I think I will pause there.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's perfect compliment for Tony, and I think you'll see why we saw there was an opportunity to blend those two stories together. I just wonder again whether we've got a little bit of time for one question even from here for Jeff around that model, those frameworks. There's one. There's probably even going, oh, I could ask heaps of questions. Jeff and has been a huge kind of support for what we're doing. You'll have seen Transcend's emblem on our supporters role, because a lot of what he's been sharing has been part of the conversation that he and I have been having now over probably 2 years or more, isn't it, Jeff?
At least, yes.
Same sorts of areas, and you'll see why on the sheets that you're providing a little bit of feedback to. That last area is the policy one, because one of the key things about that is we've got to get past the idea where we see policy as one of those things where we say, well, we think they should, and then we abdicate it. We've got to see all of us as involved in that policy discourse, and our children, our kids, in the way that Tony talked about. That was such a powerful thing that you talked about there, Tony, as well. So that education ecosystem that Jeff, one of those dimensions there, includes a lot of the things that we hope you'll put there. So look, thank you, gents. Stay on board. We'll hopefully make it available if you want. We've got a couple of New Zealand speakers coming on now who may be of interest to you to listen in. The first of those is Dr. Pam O'Connell, who I had the privilege of working with many, many years ago down in Otatahi, and saw her work, and then at the College of Ed, and mapped and tracked our careers. But Pam has been doing, in particular, and why I asked her if she might share something here, a little project, or big project, how you look at it, in Whanganui, which is very community-based, very connected with the indigeneity of that place and the people there. And I think it will help connect dots between what we've just heard from the US context now into the New Zealand context. Over to you, Pam. I'll leave that one so they can see you. Is your slideshow on here? Yeah.
Kia ora, Derek. We do go a long way back, and I do go a long way back with a lot of people in this room, and it's kind of nice to be out and about, other than in my office with a computer. Hey.
Should be.
Oh, thank you so much. Everything's going at once. I don't even do that. Yep. Okay, so tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Wai'o, ko Raki te Moanga, ko Waitaki te Awa no Wakawaiti, tōku tūranga waiwai I nei rā, kei te Whanganui Atara, e noha ana. He tangata a treaty aho, Pam O'Connell, tōku inua, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So, yeah, I'm a South Islander. And that Whanganui Atara, of course, is Wellington and not necessarily the Whanganui, which I've been doing my work in. So currently I work as a research lead at Tata Aharu. Been working with Hannah for a while, and I'm also an independent community-led researcher and evaluator. So as Tangata Treaty, it's quite nice to be standing here, a person of the treaty, because my role in these communities is very different to what I just said. You know, I just pick up whatever pen I have to, or get in front of whatever mic, or actually mostly I stand behind. I really stand alone when I'm talking about Whanganui, because I don't represent Whanganui, and of course I'm Pākehā. But I have shared the insights I'm sharing with you today. It's been a 13-year journey over 3 organisations, which I just want to acknowledge here. So I haven't got cognition's one in there, which I did do some work in there in that space, a big piece of work. But our funders, our Kahui Aho, our 2 Māori organisations there, and of course the last 4 years at Tata Ahaurau. So yeah, I'm going to just share 5 insights, 5 minutes. Yeah, hopefully. Look, insight 1, if we go on to that, just click that. This seems obvious, all right? Place matters, but in fact, it does spell out boundaries that mana whenua understand. It's a place where the inequities live out in front of you, and you're very connected in that space. So it does matter. So it's not just about a community-led, for me, is about mana whenua being involved. It's about whānau, it's intergenerational. It's also, and we're lucky enough in this space to have our kahui ako actually really connected into this word. It's quite unique. When I've looked at other kahui and ako, we don't have the same connections in governance. So that's why I think place matters. We've got an awful lot of innovation where place hasn't come into it. And I think that's an essential insight. We often talk about it being a demand and supply model space, where the supply space are the education providers. It doesn't pitch each other against each other, but the demand space, that of tamariki, rangatahi, families, whānau, hapu, iwi, civic leaders, and anyone that actually wants to have a say about education, actually. So I was particularly interested in that community conversation that Jeff was talking about. We talk about having shared goals and a shared responsibility. The village raising the child. We've heard all of these, but actually you've got to see them in action when it really matters. So community-led transformation, where place matters, is both educators and mana whenua acting collectively. It doesn't happen easily because it's power sharing. We've talked about that today. So this is really about rebalancing of power, this work. It was also a lot about bold pushbacks in a system. So this photo was one of our first hui, where we didn't ask educators to speak. We actually asked whānau here to talk about it's a long time ago now, 2013. We asked whānau to say, what did they want in terms of the data that was being shared? You know, there was lots of big tables being shared out with NCA and stuff in that space. So they said what they wanted. So it was a bit of a moment for our kahui, which actually hadn't formed at that stage. So place does matter. I'll leave that there. I think you'll get the bits in between. So the second one is obvious too, isn't it? Relationship. We've been talking about this. It's a mantra in our whole system. Relationships matter. And you've got to, I think for me, I had to understand just what those relationships were formed like, but also in readings that I'd been doing around this, particularly Alison Jones's book just recently talked about being in a relationship. And I love it, the hyphen between Māori and Pākehā, in relationship. That's a whole different space. People talk about the third space as it's a whole literature kind of concept. And they've done that overseas as well. and others talk about it as a space where you can combine things. We try to redefine that. It's very intentional. So on one side, in order to, as part of mana whenua, you don't have to define or be explicit about anything. Remember this, my lens is coming from tangata treaty here. You have to be, you can just be who you are and how you do things. And on the other side, you can be school or ECE and do it how you do things. And in the middle is a space which we set up. Tamaho, one of my colleagues, currently now at the Teaching Council, he came up with that. It's a treaty relationship space where you have to be explicit. I was a boundary walker. Someone was talking about that before. Michael Lipsky talked about that in his book, Street Level Bureaucracy. And it's specific. You actually have to walk the boundaries and push back. So when we were offering curriculum, you know, a school would say, we want a science lesson on this. Can you do something about this history curriculum? Can you do something about things? And I was the one that was up there going, nah, we're not. Guess what? Who decides here what they want to share? Well, that's taken about 15 years, I would say, to now working really well as an iwi curriculum. So that's an important part for me to understand what the boundaries are important, and the explanation and the pushbacks actually happen respectfully in that space. Respectfully in that space. Let me go on. Too fast, I hope. I want to briefly touch on this. We know that structure matters. You've got to be at the governance level for sure. And that was actually, before the kahui was put together, that was joined up. So they actually had a place in the governance, but also at every level. So this is just a snapshot of a diagram we were trying to show to a particular piece of work we were doing. But everybody was involved. The ministry were involved, the local ministry were involved. We had our schools, we had our Ropo Mātua, which was a design group with everybody on it. And when I say everybody, representing schools, ECEs, and mana whenua, and externals who could offer us. And we still have that in the work that we do. And we had learners in whānau. And I think this is where we started to think about things differently. I was always a co-lead in anything. So whenever I was doing professional development, Tamaho or Tifa or Uncle were there in order to make sure I wasn't putting myself at any risk telling their story. That was really important to me. But also the respect they held for the mana of the school. And that's a really important part of it. But that structure is really important. So at every level, we were being a collective. Hannah talks about this a lot. She taught me this stuff. Narratives, what's in your head matters. And so understanding that, we've had a national conversation, and Jeff was talking about the local conversations they were having about what people want. But we have to understand what is the narrative that's getting in the way or making it work. So this became a really important space for us in terms of the iwi organisations that I was working with and alongside, and I lived in them, that was where we met. The kahui apo leads lived there so they could meet the nans and the aunties and uncles. So it was part of bringing it all together structurally too. So we got involved in a kaupapa which was ending streaming in Aotearoa, being led out of Kaitahu. But we had to know, their advice to us was, hey, we need to know what the lie of the land was. So Tifa and I, along with a whole lot of young people who asked the questions, worked with children. Rangatahi worked with the nans and the aunties and uncles and the kaumātua and the teachers and the leaders, and we asked them the questions. And we found 8 narratives at play. And what is quite interesting for us, when we went and we co-analysed it together around a table, what was actually happening here was that before we could design anything, we had to understand those narratives. What we found, of course, well, not of course, but what we found was that Māori, and in fact, whānau, knew it was happening and shrugged their shoulders, that's just how it is. Teachers knew this language really well. They could tell us everything about it and why and who it was impacting. again, an influence of narratives that were coming from Kaitahu as well. But a lot of our interviews on the whānau side said, well, we know what it means and it could cause some harm, but what are we going to do? So our next thing was we had to do something different. So we called in and ran wānanga, and we created a timeline of the whakapapa in Whanganui of what's happened here about streaming to understand the narratives that Hannah was talking about this morning. They were run by a group of either young people or some teachers came forward to run them. So they took these whānau down this timeline. If you're walking down a physical timeline, then we asked them, what do you want to do in terms next? So that right at the end of the slides, in two slides' time, is a poster that's their words about what they're going to ask their schools. The schools know they're going to with. So that's what I'm talking about, the balance of power and giving agency to a whole community. So here's a little bit about what the wānanga looked like. We did these posters. We were trying to explain streaming, for goodness sake. Most people think it's, music. The kids all thought it was. But we picked out things that people understood. Uncle John is an ex-shearer, so we used that analogy to speak to them about what that means. So this is about language matters as well. Our shared language is critical. That's probably the thing that I've learned most out of all of this work over many communities now. It's not dumbing it down, it's building a bridge. It's building a bridge. And what we've done recently in some work in Taiahi Awhatu, which is the most recent of what we call responses, we don't call them projects, responses in the community, is we use the words that the kids or the whānau or the teachers may have said because everybody knows what that means. And so one of our outcomes is from whānau saying, we know, can't remember the end of it, ECN schools know our tamariki and have got, know our tamariki. So I'll say that again. Whānau say ECE in schools know our tamariki and they've got their back. Now, as a teacher, I know what that means now. Silly, isn't it? We've got a whole lot of languages out there. If we'd put something really high and mighty there, no one would have bought into that. But we can indicate that. We understand what it means. And I've been using that a lot just lately in terms of a coherence across communities. This idea of taking the words and not converting them to our language, of pedagogy or whatever it is. And above, of course, we asked what would they do if streaming wasn't there. Now, those are the words that will structure up our response around that and currently does. So language really matters. This comes out of my own PhD work in coherence because when you're doing something across schools, I'm trying to get the same thing happening. So that last, might be the next one, sorry, do that again. Yeah, this on the left-hand side, right for me, is that left or right? I can't remember. I didn't get that lesson. It's a thing called a shared lens on learning and equity, actually. And actually, at the moment, it's going to be a shared lens in this place about learning and well-being. And it's actually the words of what the kids will be doing, saying, and thinking. Thinking's really important, so we write them down. And what whānau will be doing, saying, and thinking. So those words that you saw in the outcomes. And on the other side of that, the very pedagogical supports, but in a language that everybody understands. My dream, people have them, it would be that as you navigate the system in Whanganui, you've got 2 children in primary and you've got maybe 2 or 1 in high school. They should expect the same as they go through, not everyone having their own. Now, I'm glad to say Belle's here. She's from Whanganui City College. I'm glad to be sitting beside her and glad to see that she's gone home to Wainuiomata. You've still got it in place, that shared one, haven't you? Which was it was amazing for me because, someone who's, invested everything in sustainability, to see it still there and now to expand it to whānau and kids is really exciting, but it's not about me. what I want to say too, the consistency and coherence has come from Uncle John Mahi. He breaks the doors open. That was his role. He was given that role, break the doors and then sends the troops in to do the work. He asked this very simple question that has driven all of those things around the koru there. These are the things that we've done. Only in the 13 years I've been working with them, there's been heaps before and there'll be heaps to come. Kei te pihia, mokopuna, how are my kids going? What happens is the system gives him data that he knows, he's articulate about how his kids are failing. He wants to know something different. He wants to know a lot more about what's happening for them as kids, as uri, as Māori, as whānau members and their future. So I'm just about to go up there tomorrow or the day after, and I'm going to be interviewing him again on what would you say, and I thank you, Chris, another colleague in our organisation who's been helping me with this group of work of this piece of work. What would you say, Uncle, if that question didn't have to be asked? And we'll drop some stuff out of that. What would be happening if the if the transformation had actually happened? So my last piece there is just my thinking on when I've been working is how do I know transformation's going on? How can I test it? It's pretty simplistic, actually. It brings together a lot of what we talked this morning. That there's the poster we're gifting back to our Koinihira and giving them back to whānau to say, this is what you said, this is what you can take, this is what our young people can ask directly of schools. And this last piece is just a piece of work I've put together, I don't know, for the last 3 or 4 years working in this space. But, you can say, for instance, that, you've got them sort of at some sort of level at the table. But if you really are going to have them taking the initiation, which is at the top of that, that's where you'll see the transformation. Kia ora.